And we're back in my basement dungeon gym, like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you for spending some of your early Thursday morning here with me in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, we get to not only talk about a 90s action movie today, we get to talk about a great star of the era, and a film which was not successful with critics, but ended up being a significant box office success and advanced the career of its terrific star, Wesley Snipes. On this day, 1992 saw the release of Kevin Hook's Passenger 57. And another reason why I'm excited to talk about this movie is that it is yet another movie using the Die Hard template, where you have a hero, usually a lone male, who can take care of himself, trapped in a confined space, and terrorists doing terrorist things. Sometimes the terrorists use terrorist subterfuge because they're really trying to steal money, and other times they actually are terrorists. So you got to do the roll call, right? 1988, you have the original Die Hard. 1990, you had Die Hard 2. 1995, you had Die Hard with a Vengeance. But after the success of the first Die Hard, you had all of these other movies in the realm of Die Hard, such as one of my favorites, Toy Soldiers, which is what? Die Hard in a Prep School. Cliffhanger with Stallone, Die Hard on a Mountain. Under Siege with Steven Seagal, Die Hard on a Battleship. Sudden Death with Jean-Claude Van Damme, Die Hard in a Sports Arena. Snake Eyes is also a little bit of a Die Hard in a Die Hard on a Die Hard also in a sports arena. And there is just such a great sense of kind of nostalgia. Passenger 57 is Die Hard on a Plane. And that concept was used later twice. Air Force One, Die Hard on a Plane. Executive Decision, also Die Hard on a Plane. So many movies taking the template and running with it. So Passenger 57 has Wesley Snipes playing a security expert with the unlikely name of John Cutter. You know, I always talk about, is this a good name and that's a good name? That's not really that great of a name, John Cutter. Whereas the character played by the late Tom Sizemore, a terrific genre actor, he plays a character named Del Vecchio. Del Vecchio is a great name. Tom Sizemore looks like he could have been a Del Vecchio. You know, I buy that. But Passenger 57 came out in a latter portion of 1992. 92 is an okay year for movies. It has, you know, Candyman, one of the best horror films of the last 30, 40, 50 years, well, more like 40 or 50 years. Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven, A Few Good Men, Scent of a Woman, Howard's End. There were some really high-quality films of 92. There were also a lot of misses. And Passenger 57 was released at a time when studios were kind of getting their Oscar bait material into theaters. And a lot of the Oscar bait kind of movies just didn't hit. For example, Barry Levinson's Toys with Robin Williams. There were some people who were excited. There was even an idea that Leap of Faith with Steve Martin might get some buzz. That didn't happen. So there was an angle where a good action movie could sneak into the marketplace, even without great reviews, and make money. And this film only cost $15 million to produce and market. It looks like a more expensive film. I mean, some of the shots of the 747s and the jumbo jets on the runways, very, very well staged by the filmmaker, as I said, Kevin Hooks, whose father, Robert Hooks, had been a star during the so-called blaxploitation era, where he played, you know, the Shaft type movie, but he was in a movie called Trouble Man, which some critics thought was just atrociously bad. It was 1972, I think, but then there were other critics that say, no, the story is nothing special, but this guy is fucking great. So Robert Hooks plays a police officer in this film who is trying to help Wesley Snipes' character. But Passenger 57, if you were to watch all of the other Die Hard on a Die Hard in a Die Hard with that I mentioned, and of course I've forgotten a few because there were just so many, and many of them were, as I say, of high quality. Even Under Siege 2, you know, was a solid film. This one doesn't do what you're expecting it to, because yes, there are the elements of Die Hard on a Plane, but Wesley's character spends less time on the plane than you think. And the villain in all of these movies are only as good as their villain. So you think about it. In some of the movies I mentioned. In Cliffhanger, the villain is John Lithgow just chewing scenery like William Shatner and James Woods on crack. And John Voight from that era too. He's so absurdly over the top, speaking of Stallone. It adds to the entertainment value. Andrew Divoff gives a very straightforward and serious performance as actually a terrorist in Toy Soldiers. But then you look at Air Force One, Gary Oldman's chewing scenery, he's terrific. We know all about Alan Rickman as Hans Gruber in Die Hard 1. William Sadler, 4 years before Shawshank. Alexander Dumas, he's terrific. John Amos in Die Hard 2. And Jeremy Irons, Oscar winner, is phenomenal in Die Hard with a Vengeance. But then Powers Booth in Sudden Death, some of the best one-liners of the entire decade of the 90s. Why are you asking for $500 million? What do you expect in this economy? Just absolute gold. So Passenger 57, the villain is played by an actor who didn't have as big a career as certainly the gentleman that I mentioned, Bruce Payne. Bruce Payne is a very interesting performer. He has a good face for the movies. He looks like a Bond villain. And in this movie, he plays his main character of Charles Rain as if he is a Bond villain, with the way that he's snarky and sarcastic and always smiling or sneering. And his performance is really strong here. He's maybe the best thing about the movie other than Wesley, because Sizemore doesn't have that much to do, and Robert Hooks also doesn't have that much to do. But the villain's process, it's the sort of, we're not really sure exactly, is he a terrorist? Is he just looking for money? What are the stakes here? Because executive decision, the stakes are, there might be a nuclear attack. This is not good. Peacemaker, another one. But that's not really a confined space. George Clooney and Nicole Kidman are being chased across Europe and chasing other people across Europe. But when we think of someone's career in total, we often, like in Arnold Schwarzenegger, you think of the one-liners, I'll be back, consider that a divorce, stick around, whatever the case might be. Well, Wesley Snipes in this movie gets to deliver, easily one of the best wisecracks of the entire decade. So there's a moment in the movie where Wesley is on the plane in question. He's not at the airport trying to figure out what's going on. He's actually on the plane. And it's kind of embarrassing, a little bit antiquated, that they're communicating via a regular-looking phone, analog with a cord and all of that. Nowadays, they'd be going like this, oh, fuck you, like that kind of thing. Like even in The Departed, the guys are yelling at each other over cell phones. Wow. This is a new thing in movies. We're going to have guys yelling at each other over cell phones instead of, even Colin Farrell in a movie phone booth. It's a regular phone booth. So the character of Rain, Bruce Payne's character, is threatening Wesley's John Cutter, and Wesley is threatening him right back. So we get the idea. Wesley's character is an ex-cop, a security expert. And because it's Wesley, who is a black belt in real life, you already know you don't want to mess with this guy. Just stay out of his way. Take over don't fuck with this guy. Just don't do it. But sometimes you just don't have any choice. Hans Gruber, if he could do Die Hard, if he could reboot The Matrix, he would pick a building that John McClane is not in. And maybe John Lithgow, no thank you, I'm all set here. I don't need to fuck with the guy who played Rocky on this mountain. I'm just going to go somewhere else. Let's try something else here. Let's take over a different area. Let's go somewhere else. So the guys are threatening each other in this very old-fashioned, antiquated phone. They're throwing insults back and forth. And Wesley Snipes, he calls him Charlie. Johnny! What? You ever play roulette? On occasion. Well, let me give you some advice. Always bet on black. Hangs up the phone. And I had friends at Bev's gym that was like one of the great lines. It was hilarious in theaters 30-some years ago because the movie even went there because they're like, and I don't want to, now they wouldn't do that. They might do that now. We're supposed to laugh. That's supposed to be funny. And Wesley, it works because he doesn't deliver it with a smile. He's not treating it like it's a wisecrack. He's treating it as a threat. He's telling this guy, I'm coming, the old Stallone, I'm coming to get you. You don't have a chance. You think you've got numbers on me? Go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. Wesley doesn't have to do any real film acting here. The thing with Wesley, and you see this in some people, Nicolas Cage when he had his, kind of action hero era in the 90s, where you have performers who are capable of more than they need to do in a particular film. And all Wesley has to do is look cool and snarl a lot and fire off one-liners. And at that, he's terrific. Now, if you were asking me to rank Passenger 57, relative to some of the other movies which I legitimately consider classics, all of the movies I mentioned, with possible exception of Snake Eyes, I think they're all terrific. I think Sudden Death is Van Damme's best movie. I think Cliffhanger, you could put it in Stallone's top 5 if we take the Rocky movies, just like only pick one Rocky movie. I think Cliffhanger's great. I love Toy Soldiers. I actually think that Passenger 57 might be the weakest film of the ones that I mentioned, but it still tells a complete story. It has a lot of really well done stunt work. Again, you look at the budget, I understand it's 33 years ago, but there were action movies back then where films that looked like this were costing 60 or 70 million. The fact that the filmmaker was able to get this film in for that price, this is where it changes the perception. Like I mentioned during the episode on Waterworld, if you just look at the worldwide gross of Waterworld, 30 years ago, you say, well, this movie was an enormous hit. Why are there so many people even now saying, oh, that was a disaster? Well, the disaster was that the set kept getting destroyed because they decided to shoot in the Pacific during typhoon season because I don't know why they decided to do that. So relative to budget, the budget which could have been 75 to 100 ended up being 200 million. So the film appeared to not be that big of a success because it just cost 100 and something million more than it was supposed to. So Passenger 57's worldwide gross of somewhere between 65 and 70 million, without any context, you say, okay, 1992, but maybe this movie cost 50 million or more to make, but you find out it was only 15 to produce and market. That means it grossed more than 4 times its production cost, which means it was a substantial box office hit. And as I said, it kept Wesley, on his kind of path of being one of the biggest stars in Hollywood in his kind of A-list period. I guess you could say it ended after the first Blade, but he was kind of starting to slip a little bit. He took a few projects. I saw Money Train in theaters. Jennifer Lopez is the only reason to see that film, because as much as I love Woody Harrelson and Wesley and Woody together, the magic is just not the same for them there as it had been in, White Men Can't Jump 3 years earlier. And really the only thing memorable in Money Train is Jennifer Lopez. It was her film debut, and she plays the material in that movie seriously, and the guys are treating it like they're in a comedy, even though it's like a cop thriller. And they're joking around, joking their way through the movie, threatening each other. Now, threatening one another over who gets to maybe get with Jennifer Lopez's character, that's great. But they're just goofing off. There's too much lazy, laid-back clowning in that movie. And then you have Jennifer Lopez treating this film like it's a serious cop film. It could be Fort Apache the Bronx. Anyway, so Passenger 57 does not reinvent the wheel. It doesn't do anything that extraordinary, except stage action in tight quarters and in situations where you know that it probably took a ton of takes, and this was the kind of movie that could not have been easy for anybody. You should think of it this way. Bruce Payne spends most of the movie on a plane, or in the immortal words of George Carlin, in the plane. I always forget that. I'm not going to get on the plane, I'm going to get in the plane. Bruce Payne spends most of the movie in the plane, which means 80% of his time on set, it's a plane set, and he's sitting in an aisle somewhere, or he's standing up brandishing a gun. He doesn't have that many locations to deal with. Wesley's character moving around in a car, at the airport, also on the plane. He and Bruce Payne probably didn't spend more than a couple of days, spoiler alert, they probably didn't spend more than a couple of days together on set. And that's the way it goes. Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan, William Shatner and Ricardo Montalban from Hell's Heart, I Stab at Thee, I don't think they were ever on set at the same time. So that's the way that it works. There are movies where the hero and villain, are in the same space frequently, but even Die Hard with a Vengeance. Maybe Bruce Willis and Jeremy Irons worked together 3 days. Maybe it was 1 day. That I don't know. Nowadays, we might actually know that kind of information. So before I forget, I don't think Passenger 57 is currently free on any particular streaming service. Some of the obscure ones, maybe like Pluto or Canopy or one of those, because there are times where you just Google and the thing would only list whether it's on Netflix or Amazon Prime or HBO Max, Paramount Plus, MGM Plus, Peacock, etc. But this is the kind of movie that I'm always comfortable recommending to people. Like if somebody says, just give me your basic standard 90s action movie, because people always talk about how action was done in the 90s. 90s was the best decade Hollywood ever had. I'll go down on that hill. I will argue. You want to give me 70s? I'll have that argument. That's a good argument. You know why it's a good argument? Because nobody gets hurt. It's fun. It's a fun argument to have. But this is a movie that I recommend. If you want to just shut your brain off at the door, not get intellectually challenged, not have to worry about Armageddon in a manner of executive decision or even Under Siege with Seagal. You just want to have a good time at the movies, and you want to see a really cool star from the era, not really blowing shit up real good, but blowing stuff up, metaphorically speaking, and the dastardly villains. And also, Elizabeth Hurley plays a flight attendant in this movie, and Wesley has another moment. In this case, I don't think that it would happen today. So there's a moment in this movie where, I won't spoil it, but he looks at Elizabeth Hurley. And this was years before Scandal. I think she and Hugh Grant were just like, they were dating at this point. The Scandal didn't happen until 1995. Again, I'm not going to repeat it, but that was one of the dumbest scandals in the history of scandals. But Elizabeth Hurley, who I had never heard of, she's just obviously quite strikingly attractive woman. She was a fashion model who became an actress. And then, was in the first Austin Powers. She's fine. She's actually really good in that. So Wesley has a moment where he looks at the Elizabeth Hurley character and he just goes, what a waste. Out of context, it means nothing, but in the context of the movie, that might be the most offensive thing in the entire film. The way that he says it and why he says it at that particular moment. But this film is not playing by any kind of rules. They don't give a shit. They're just trying to give you the wisecracks, the one-liners. They're trying to give you the big action sequences. And Wesley Snipes, who was, as I say, an accomplished martial artist in his regular life, it gives him the opportunity to show some of his fighting skills and just look like do alpha male shit within the context of this Die Hard on a 747/Die Hard in an airport. And all of the supporting players, I mentioned Robert Hooks and Tom Sizemore, they don't really have that much to do. Most of this movie is trying to figure, how is Wesley going to get out of this? How is he going to, quote unquote, save the day? And spiritually, in this regard, it's closest to Sudden Death, the Van Damme film that I mentioned. I mean, that's one of the ultimate guilty pleasures, but Sudden Death is definitely a better movie than Passenger 57. But that film, it's almost entirely one guy. That Van Damme's Darren McCord, he's the only guy that knows what's going on. There's dozens of terrorists, and there's 15 to 20,000 people in the arena, and they're all going to die unless somebody stops Powers Booth's terrorist who's not really a terrorist. He's a thief who's taking terrorist actions to steal a shit ton of money. But this is one of those, it's just one of those films. It reminds us of a different time in history, and it's like, when the James Bond series slowed down, and even now they're trying to figure out what to do, where a certain kind of audience just wants a movie where things make sense, where one guy can just put down every possible threat, maybe one bad guy at a time. And Passenger 57 does that. It fulfills that requirement, where you have a kind of an alpha male who is highly trained, appears to have no fear, ice water in his veins. And the terrorists, who aren't necessarily terrorists, they actually do not have ice water in their veins. They're a little jumpy, they're a little nervous. Whereas John Cutter is steadfast in his belief, whatever happens, I'm going to have an answer for. I'm going to have an answer for this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy, and this guy. And, there is something to be said for that conventional 3-act structure. Establish the character, he's a little bit of a burnout, he's frustrated, he's got a bad seat. That was something that was part of, it's so stupid, it was part of the advertising and the promotion. He's got a bad attitude and a bad seat. And then, the joke is, well, what seat is he sitting in? He's sitting in seat what? He's sitting in seat 57. Again, nail meat head. The movie is called Passenger 57 because he's in seat 57. They're not trying to trick us here. This is not Salvador Dali surrealist shit, or this is not an impressionist painting. This is right on the button. And many critics who didn't like the movie, one of the reasons they said, well, this is very much paint by the numbers. Paint by the numbers meaning there's no creativity here. Wesley doesn't really get to do anything except look cool and beat the shit out of bad guys. But sometimes that's all you need. Wesley was right in the middle of his prime here. His career was going to go up. He had Rising Sun with Sean Connery the next year. He had Boiling Point with Dennis Hopper. That was kind of an interesting film. Was it Dennis Hopper? I know Paul Gleason was in it. I think Dennis Hopper was in Boiling Point. Demolition Man, of course, with Stallone. So Wesley was working feverishly, had Drop Zone the following year. What a great star. And somebody that, obviously, I remember when he had the problems with the accountants, my dad was talking about it because Dad being a CPA. My father didn't like when people got in trouble and always blamed the accountant. Wesley kind of blamed the accountant. My dad's like, always blaming the accountant. I didn't do that. Neither did this guy. He's got to know that he needs to pay taxes. Well, maybe he really didn't know. Everybody pays together. This is the kinds of conversations you have when somebody would get in a lot of trouble for tax evasion. And then they even got to use that in Expendables Part 3 when Stallone and his guys get Wesley Snipes. They break him out of prison. It's just true in the movie. What were you even in prison for? And Wesley looks at the camera and goes, tax evasion. Great stuff. But Passenger 57, released on this day, November 6, 1992, a very right-on-the-nose, sparkling example of the Hollywood die-hard on a die-hard and a die-hard with a phenomenon that was all over the place in the 90s, and you still see occasionally the kind of ticking clock, hero trapped in a confined space kind of movie. This film does not reinvent the wheel, but it is entertaining from first frame to last. And what a great star in Wesley Snipes, a.k.a. Blade. He will always be Blade. There is only ever going to be one Blade, and that will be Wesley Snipes. But in this movie, John Cutter, Blade, Cutter, great, right? I wonder if I'm sure people made jokes about that. But happy 33rd to Kevin Hooks, Die Hard, on a plane and kind of in an airport, Passenger 57, starring the always fire Wesley Snipes with Tom Sizemore and Elizabeth Hurley and the filmmaker's father, Robert Hooks, in support. This has been episode 638 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your Thursday morning here with me in New York. And if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Until then, always bet on black. Peace.